Well, welcome everyone. Let's just dive into our production music panel with Nathalie Bonin, which we just met, and Mirette Seireg. If you want to kind of introduce yourself and talk also how you're related to production music.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Mirette Seireg. I'm the president and CEO of MPATH Music, located in Los Angeles, and we are music publishers. So I work with a variety of composers that actually produce the music, and I'm involved with the publishing side. One of our foremost composers is here with me today, Nathalie Bonin. Do you want to start?
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm actually initially a musician, violinist, played for many years, toured, classically trained, dived into composition about 15 years ago and started doing some music for TV shows. And at some point I got introduced to what was called production music. I had no idea what that was. And actually the first label that I got to work with really was with MPATH. And that's been something like 5 years, I think, almost.
It's almost 5
right?
years. Yes.
Yes. So I've actually learned the ropes with Mirette and Michael quite a bit, learning how the format is and what's the protocols around it, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, it's been an ongoing adventure, and it's just being positive as we go, because I think production music is taking more and more the stage in having almost half of the music we hear being production music. So I'm excited to be here and hopefully help anybody that wants to learn more about it.
That's absolutely correct. And how this relates to the AWFC specifically is that MPATH, production music, music in general, but especially production music, is hugely underrepresented by women composers. And proudly, MPATH is the first, and according to Sony Music Publishing, only production music library to have achieved gender parity. So gender parity and full inclusion is baked into our brand.
Nice. And Nathalie, you just mentioned you didn't know what production music is before you started 5 years ago. So I have a feeling there's some members maybe on this chat who also don't know exactly what production music is. So could you two give us a little your rundown what exactly it is and what it is not?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Do you want to start? Or
go ahead? I think from your perspective, it might be even more interesting because you didn't know what it was.
No, I didn't. I was used to scoring to picture. So so that's very different, because you are inspired by the picture, the story. And for me, that was a vehicle to really tap into the emotion and get inspired by what was the story on screen. So when I dived into production music, it was the reverse. It was the opposite. I was given a brief, and then I had to compose in that kind of genre or emotion or something that we're supposed to convey, but without the image. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the format needed to help the editors to be able to edit, because obviously that they were not going to edit their movie on my music. So I had to understand kind of the roadmap of what it is you need to do in a track. So leaving edit points, having this arc that most of them like, having a lot of times an ABA form, but not too far away, never modulating, which is hard to do when you want to get creative. It requires another kind of creativity because it's very hard to edit, obviously, if you're going from one key to the other. So I think the more that I got into it, the more mistakes I did, the more I learned. And I think that it's just a different format. It's a different animal. But yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're not scoring to picture, do you then get inspirations? Do you get moods to score to? Or is a client saying we need this kind of music? I mean, what do you score to then? Or what's your starting point?
Yeah, I think Mirette can talk about the briefs that we're given as composers.
So basically, production music is specifically composed for licensing rather than to picture. So we compose things for licensing, but not for a specific production. One really important difference is that the publisher owns the copyrights for the term of the agreement, which means that this allows our distributor to negotiate contractually costs for sync fees, etc. But specifically what we look at, because we know that production music is going to be edited, what moods are really in high demand for television, film, games, advertisements, and essentially any media. In advertisements, even on radio, you will have a voiceover and you want to elevate the mood in order to sell whatever product the advertiser is selling. So we often look at composing the music in a modular way so that we go from maybe dark to light. We have a problem that has to then become a solution in the music. And that allows the editor to take segments of the music and edit it to their specific picture.
There's also the fact that we need to provide what I call an IKEA kit. So
that's
so
right.
So most of the times you've got the full mix, you've got alt mixes for, you know, the dialogue or some soft passages that they need under something happening on screen. Then you have cut downs because sometimes they're going to be used on commercials. So you have 1 minute cut down to 30 seconds. You need to do like a stinger and a hook, and all of that you need to provide as a package. And normally as a composer, you provide them the stems of the major groups of instruments. You provide all those cut downs and the alt mixes.
I think IKEA kit is a really good metaphor for what we do. So in other words, you may have a full mix, but if you have all of the different stems, if the music editor really doesn't want to have percussion, for example, you can mute the percussion. If you want vocals, you can have the vocals or take away the vocals. And so you not only have different segments within the track that have different moods, which is very important in production music. You have sonic consistency among the different moods, and then you have stings, stems, hooks, so that the music editor can play and just grab exactly and construct the type of, it's more of Legos, I would think, whatever vision that they have for picture.
And how long do the pieces usually last, or the, you know, stings, stems, and hooks?
We generally ask for 2 to 3 minutes for full mix, as well as for the different stems. And then we also ask for 30-second cut downs and 60-second cut downs, which are in and of itself a complete track that's only 30 seconds. So you cut it down into 30-second segments, 60-second segments. So yeah, between 2 to 3 minutes, but an important thing is that you don't loop any of the different pieces, so that there has to be variation within the track.
Right, I would say that the variations need to actually amplify, like you're not going to repeat a section, but you need to have a recall of the theme because it needs to be something that's memorable. So you kind of had to build on the structure, maybe augment it, diminish it, or find a way to add color to the main theme. But I also want to note that, you know, you don't just fade out after 1 minute on your little IKEA kit. That's also part of the challenge. And the more that I've been composing for this type of music, I've found tricks to help me, because initially trying to make a 60-second all-encompassing little mini piece of the full version was very hard because I didn't think about it. So I didn't think about the tempo, I didn't think it, and then having to pick some sections to make it fit, because it can't just be, oh, it's good enough at 53 seconds, because the spot is 1 minute. So the last stinger, for example, needs to be between 56, 57 seconds so that the tail will end, and you're not going to get a hard cut if, for example, in a commercial. So you need to plan out how you're structuring the piece so that you can eventually structure the 30 seconds and minute. It's something to think about.
And could you, Maria Molinari asked, what's the difference between a sting and a hook? Could you please explain a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the hook is a little longer. Usually it's kind of a little mini segment of the thematic material. And the other one is usually just the final chord, kind of really a blaster. Yeah.
Yeah, and the sting allows the editor to finish off a particular segment. So if they only need 10 seconds, for example, they can use part of the sting or a little bit of the sting to complete that particular segment.
Yeah, I would compare, like, the hook could be like, the bumper, for example, of coming back to a show or something more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you just said that within the 30 or 60 seconds or a minute, you don't want to repeat, you don't want to loop within the piece, but then the entire piece itself needs to be editable and loopable. How do you go about that? How do you create a piece? How do you keep that in mind to have like a 90-second piece that is loopable? How do you create that? What are the thought processes there?
Do you want to answer, or should I?
I think it's really good for you to explain your particular process, and then I can jump in. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, so we don't want to loop anything exactly the same, because that's not going to really give any new material to.
There's no added value. There's no added value to doing that.
Right. So
and it's a waste of real estate, of precious real estate.
Exactly. Actually, you can have a 1.5 minute piece that is more valuable than a 3 minute if the 3 minute doesn't change that much. So if you have your sections, like I would say, for example, if there's an ABA form, you could have like A prime V, and then go back to A with like another variation on that. So I usually try to build in a way that's been the most successful, I find. So starting with a minimalistic approach to a theme, and then varying it with different colors, and then adding a variation like a B section that's a little farther away, but that brings that tension that we were talking about that needs to be resolved. And then I often come back with a bigger statement of the initial. But what the editor can do is actually flip these around. The important thing is to keep some points where they can edit. So having silence is important between the sections, even though we would be tempted to really go and flow with the whole thing. And sometimes that's something I need to keep in mind myself, because it's very hard for them. They have to create a fade or something, and it's never as natural as if you leave a rest.
Yeah, so allowing the track to breathe during the different segments is very, very useful for music editors.
Maria Louis asked, are reverb tails included within the 30 or 60 seconds? Can you talk about that?
Well, I think some I've been told that some can actually go beyond, but the most important thing is to have that sting around 56 or 57, depending on the tempo. Sometimes if the tempo is very slow, it doesn't make sense to have the sting too late, because then you have to cut off the the resonance of it. But if so 56 or 57 seconds, and then if it does tail later on, it helps the editors actually fade in, and they could always fade a little earlier if they needed.
That's right. And our job is to make the life of a music editor as user-friendly as possible, because then we get the reputation of being very user-friendly. And as you know, music editors are under huge time crushes, and so that's what we do to help them.
Cool. Maria Molinari, you have another question if you want to come on.
Hi, Mirette.
Hi.
I'm wondering about, you were saying about no modulation. Do you mean like within the sections A, B, A prime, etc., you can have a modulation within the section, but it should start and end in the home key, let's say C major. The beginning of each section should be and end should be C major so that they can be put together. Can you modulate within the sections or no?
I find that I've been going to relative keys sometimes, but just momentarily. You can't go back to a theme on a different key. For example, if you do ABA, you can't do the second A in a different key than the first one. The stinger is not going to work, for example, with one of them. I've been, going around different, exploring, let's say, the keys related to that, but not going farther away. You really need to stick to the main key.
Right. So if you have, let's say, a contrasting section, does that mean you can go to the key of the dominant, let's say, for the B section, but then make sure that you return to the tonic key?
If you can finish with your stinger,
Mm-hmm.
that section, that would be probably a good cue to, is that going to work? If whatever section you have, you could end with your hook or stinger, I think that's how you're going to determine. So that's why I'm saying I usually, if I want to go in the B section, for example, I would go to the relative minor for a little bit, but I would manage to come back to the major key by the end of that section to make sure that if they want to end on that, they could.
Okay, thank you.
How about tempo changes within the piece? They frowned about. Can you do them? How does that work?
I think I've gotten away with just the ending sometimes being a little retarded, because that's not retarded in that sense, but that's my French coming out. Retarded. But
delayed.
Delayed is the better word. Yes, delayed. So I mean, sometimes I do when I can. Certain libraries don't allow that, but others do. So I have to ask. I think it's a good idea to ask, because it often depends on the clients they have. But generally, you don't want to change tempos in general. But I would say that's like 99% of the time, but I still get away with a few of them.
That's right. And also, if you can have breaks or pauses when you do have a tempo change, that makes it, if the editor finds that tempo change to be really interesting and effective, then it becomes more valuable.
Yeah, you can use different ways also to trick the ear, like, going to triplets with the same tempo in the background. You're kind of accelerating the beat, but you're not really changing the meter. So you're changing the meter in a way, but you're not changing the full, template aspect of it. So the editors are still having the same reference, which makes their lives easier than if you just decide to go to a different tempo altogether.
That's right.
Do you use vocalists sometimes also for your tracks, or is it all instrumental?
Do we use what?
Vocal also.
Oh, I've used vocal. I just don't write. I'm not a writer, songwriter, but I know that vocalists do tracks.
Yeah.
I use my voice. Yeah.
And we have some tracks that actually do incorporate very effectively vocals with lyrics. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the lyrics are general enough that they can be used for lots of different purposes. But also what's very effective is to use vocals as an instrument. And they make for some very interesting pads. And sometimes, and we have some tracks that have vocals as hooks that are really effective and quite lovely.
Even whistling.
That's right.
Whistling.
That's right. Whistling, hand clapping, all kinds, and also sound design. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Before I move into the next segment, which is more like the business side of production music and how to get into it and payment and all that. I just want to make sure, is there any more questions to the scoring aspect? Does anyone still have questions about, the creation of production music?
I just would like to add that one of the most important things above all is quality, production quality. That is what sells the music. And that is really one of the primary things we use to curate music. If production quality is not there, it's not going to sell. There's no way that we can really use it. So
right. The standards have gone up a lot.
Yeah, they've gone up and they continue to climb.
Yeah, I will
And
say
Jeff,
also being authentic, being really authentic about what you are, what you do, what your style is. It's not a good practice to just try to do any style out there and play, create as many different tracks in all the genres you can imagine. That's not really going to get you anywhere. I think the more that I've been authentic about who I am as an artist and been using that as my voice, that is how people are now recognizing me as, okay, she's that kind of composer, and they know that if they need a track of that, they will, they might find something in my catalog. And I'm not going to start a new, banjo trip of, it's not, probably not in this life, because I'm just going to waste a lot of money and time just trying to be something I'm not.
I just want to, if people haven't seen it in the chat room, Jeff just put some samples in the chat room from the MPATH site. So if you want to look at some samples, copy and paste the links, please. There's some playlists where you can look at some samples of production music also.
There is one other thing that if anybody is interested in entering into this world of production music, there are some other things that I highly recommend for alt versions. You can take a regular track, add some holiday bells or something, and then suddenly when the holiday season comes and you've got an alt version that is hugely sellable. So these are some of the things that we look at it. We look at it from a marketing perspective, and I highly encourage doing that.
So when people sign with MPATH, how does it work? How do you get paid in production music?
Okay, so our particular distributor is APM Music in North America, and for the rest of the world, it's KPM. Both are divisions of Sony Publishing Group, Sony Music Publishing. So once the track is uploaded and released, it's available worldwide, globally. When a track is licensed, and it is generally licensed through a download from the APM website. You can go to our website if you're only interested in MPATH music, but that redirects you right back to the APM or the KPM website if you live outside of the United States. When we receive a statement from our distributors, we get a full printout of what music was licensed for a particular quarter. And from that, we glean licensing fees that were received. So the model that we used is actually quite typical, and I'm asking everyone, please don't deviate from it, because a lot of companies are getting very, very tricky about taking more and more of composers' rights away from them. You should insist on receiving half of the sync fee. So any sync fees that APM collects for MPATH on MPATH's part, we split 50-50 with the composer. So the composer gets 100% of the writer's share, and we as the publisher receive half of the publishing share. We split our publishing share with APM, our distributor, or KPM for the rest of the world. So that is one thing. That is the sync fee. The sync fee actually pales in comparison with the potential for residuals. So the PRO, your PRO, which we embed in your track when we upload it to our distributor, travels with the track worldwide, so that the internet police can absolutely track usage. The PRO collects residuals, and that the residual is again split 50% composer, 50% or writer share, 50% publisher share. And the PRO cuts checks and sends them directly to the writer. So that's how they get paid.
You have to be patient because it's not on the blockchain yet, so it's going to take a couple of years.
This is called a get-rich-slow scheme.
Yeah, when you get in production music, this is for like 5 years from now. By the time you get in, and it's yeah.
Yeah. It's for the long haul. Think of it like an annuity. You put a little in, keep putting in, you keep putting in, and eventually there's a payoff.
I think of it as my retirement fund. That's how I think of it.
It's a nice retirement fund to have.
And it actually can be quite lucrative if you stick with it.
But Nathalie, I mean, you're also scoring. You're not only doing production music. I mean, you're scoring to picture. You're doing so many other things. Is it completely separate, or does it inform also your other work? Or can you talk a bit about the benefits, of production music a bit more, and why you like working in production music? But also, is there a downside or an upside also for other work, or is it completely separate?
Yeah, it's really its own little bubble, and I like it because it enables me to create sometimes in styles that I'm not asked for. For example, I'm just going to give an example where I had 5 Hallmark movies in a row. I was doing rom-coms and Christmas for a year and a half, and at some point you need a break from that, and production music allowed me to do these dramatic scores, more hybrid scores, more things that I needed for me as an artist. So it was like a great exploration lab in between the scoring gigs and the scoring projects or the performance. For me, as a violinist that still plays quite a bit on stage, I find that I can bring that also to my production music tracks. I find that's part of my inspiration. I mean, a lot of my tracks, probably 90% of my tracks are strings involving my violin playing on it, sometimes my vocals, and sound effects that I go from this, the sounds that I create and stuff like that. So I see it as a really great sandbox that I have. The only thing that I would say is that it does take more discipline, because you don't have, a lot of times you don't really have a deadline for it. I mean, sometimes you do, because sometimes I get brief and you have to send a track by that date, but a lot of times right now I do my own albums, for example. Well, I have to be self-disciplined to do that within a range of time that makes sense. I'm not going to wait 3 years to do volume 2, for example, of Queen of Hearts, which I'm like, all right, so now what is the time frame? And I'm trying to be disciplined in between my other projects. So that's one thing. You need to be your own boss about that. And developing relationships, I think that's also really part of this whole thing, is how you develop relationships, not only with the label, but also with the supervisors. And that's very important, because that's how you get listened to, and afterwards they can go pick your piece because they know you. If they don't know you, then then they can't really find you. APM has close to 1 million tracks.
That's right. And speaking of having a million tracks, that's why we spend an inordinate amount of time producing the metadata, so that if a music producer or music director, music supervisor was able to type in keywords, key moods, beats per minute, music for character, movement, instrumentation, our music will come up. They will find it. And so we go over the metadata no fewer than 3 or 4 times before we actually upload the album. Another thing that we do a little bit differently than other libraries is we make sure that the metadata is in fact in alignment with the artistic vision of the writer. So after we go through 3 rounds of polishing the metadata and getting some input from the writer themselves, we will send you, if you choose, it's not obligatory, but if you choose, you have the option of actually reviewing the metadata, the album cover, etc., so that you feel as though you're putting your best foot forward. And oftentimes writers will say, they really appreciate learning to market their music. And this allows writers to learn to market their music. In terms of some of the other pros and cons, I would venture to say that many writers were able to get traction in building their portfolio through production music. Oftentimes the opportunities don't really arise if a showrunner doesn't know you. But all media uses production music in some shape or form in combination with the actual score. So this is a way for showrunners to get to know your work, but more importantly, the music supervisors. The other one that Nathalie touched upon that I think is a really important point is, in general, you have very flexible hours. So, for example, when Nathalie was scoring 5 shows for Hallmark, like all at once, which was insane, she was able to put a pause on her production music. And we also have a group called Mamas in Music. These are mothers who have young children, and they really can't work on a score at this stage in their life. But this allows them to keep very sharp in their craft. When the baby's napping, they can be writing music. And also for our male composers who may have a lull in their gigs, as anyone who scores films or television knows, there are times of feast and there are times of famine. And it doesn't matter how great of a composer you are, that is a reality. Production music allows you to continue to produce music and hone in on your skills, as well as experiment with different styles that you've always wanted to pursue. And this is a really good way to use your downtime.
May I add something about the story about, the Queen of Hearts album?
Oh, please do. It's a great story.
Because I think that's something that I didn't realize at the beginning, is that at the beginning I was just following the briefs and just responding to the briefs, which is basically, but at some point I felt so strongly about my, that I could fit in a production, not to mention Bridgerton, that I did everything that I could and became proactive about it and made an album with Bridgerton in mind. And because I had built the relationship with Empath and APM, they became allies in this way, in how to get to the right people, how to get them to listen to the tracks. You can't force anybody to like or place them, but if you feel really strongly about something that you think your music would be perfect, there's a chance that it is actually. And so it actually ended up being placed on Bridgerton because I was so proactive about it. And I had the team of Empath, and that helped put the record in record time in like 9 days, with all the sheet music and everything. And it was quite a bit of work, but when you have that strong team, you can really make it happen. And so I just encourage you to think of it as a proactive project as well, not just reacting to briefs.
And we absolutely encourage that. Absolutely. Nathalie, I'll fill in the story a little bit just because I think it's fun and interesting. Nathalie called me and said, I watch Bridgerton. I watch it. I've binged on it. I love it. And there's no reason why my music couldn't be on that show.
It wasn't because of the Duke.
And I said, okay, sky's the limit. That's a tall order. But if we don't try and put everything into that, the no is guaranteed. So let's go for the yes. I called up APM and spoke with the strategist over there. I said, okay, I know you've got an account manager who handles the Netflix account, but because I had Bridgerton in mind, and because Nathalie was so passionate that her music was a very good fit, and of course, then I started watching Bridgerton and blah, 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 blah. And finally, we got to the account manager at APM, and we got to the music supervisor for the actual show. We just pulled in all of the forces. And we also had an ally with the Production Music Association, called them up, and we were headed towards an annual conference. I said, let's get Nathalie up there with her violin, play live. Let's get some momentum behind it. So essentially, we waged a campaign. It was a tall order, and a tall order requires inordinate amount of energy, planning, strategizing, and pulling in all of the forces. And this is where production music becomes very exciting.
Yeah. There was a near fatal car crash in between all of that too, but that just added a bit of spice.
Oh, that.
But it really seems, Mirette, that you're more. It's like production music, and you're promoting, you're managing, you're like an agent. You're like it feels like there's so many things that come together in production music.
Absolutely, and I can show you what the metadata looks like. I thought people might be interested in that.
Yeah, let me make you a co-host.
Okay.
And then you can share.
But it's an inordinate amount of work, and you will see for sure an already. Can you see this?
Mm-hmm.
Can you also, while you show us that, define what metadata exactly is for people that might not be, or what you define as metadata, so for people that might not be as familiar?
Yeah, metadata are all of the facets that get programmed into the search engine so people can find your track. Okay, so for example, artists very seldomly have no idea how to name their album. And so I come up with an interesting, captivating, this is my challenge, album title. There was no title on this album, which is why I worked very closely with the composer. Then we have an album description, and it has to be quick and concise, basically talking about what is this album all about. The track title. This particular composer just put in a number. How they were following it. So I listened to it. I also work with a team of interns from Berklee School of Music and Peabody. And I have them do an initial draft and then I finalize it with them. Believe it or not, metadata is not taught in music school. So this gives them exposure and it helps me if I have to push a rock up 100 feet, they're able to push it at least halfway up there. And then I tweak. So then I finalize it with them. And then before uploading, I am putting the work down, allow it to pause and give it a third tweak. So the metadata is a track title, track description. We have the BPM, and this is generally an average, the artist name, and then we take all of the master genre is coded. The additional genre is coded. How this music might be used is coded. And very importantly, the moods are coded. And if you have more than 5 to 7 moods, you've got too many. If you don't have less than 5 to 7 moods, you have a very uninteresting track. So we keep all of these moods. We have a general category for the moods. In this one particular case, strong is a general category, but specifically it's powerful strong. So we parse apart, what does strong mean? What does serious mean? What kind of serious? And disturbing, what kind of disturbing? And all of these are coded and uploaded. Then we have character, movement, and tempo does not always match the BPM. So we take a good look at that so that they have both BPM as well as tempo and the instrumentation. So this is the actual metadata chart that we use to upload, and this is what it looks like. Then after that, we also add all of the information about the composers. So for example, if you co-compose, what percentage goes to each writer, and what their PRO numbers are, so that it can be tracked and money can be collected. So all of that information gets uploaded for every single track, for every album. And then once the album is completed, then we take this album and it goes to the copyright office. And we get a copyright for that author, for that writer, so that everything is protected.
And that's all something you are doing. The composer doesn't really have to worry about
The
that,
composer
right?
does not have to worry about that.
Loving Mirette for doing that.
This is the publisher's task. But this makes it very easy to find. And my goal with the metadata is that when a music supervisor puts in their keywords, and they're very good at filtering, at the filters, and maybe only 10 tracks appear, that I have something that's going to call attention to our tracks, and that when they actually listen to the track, open it and listen to it, it will not disappoint. What they wanted is reflect, so that the actual music, the metadata, and the album cover are in alignment and consistent. And that's what builds trust for our label in the eyes of music supervisors or anyone who is licensing the music.
Cool. Mirette, earlier you also talked about sync, and I was wondering if you can talk a bit more about that also for people that might not exactly know how sync works and what a sync agent is. Just a little boiled down version of, what's different between a sync agent and the regular agent, and do you get in touch with them, like with a music supervisor? Is that done through you guys at MPATH?
Actually, that is done by APM. Okay. So the copyright is held by the publishers, and APM actually releases the track, and when someone wants to sync our music, they actually do it through APM. So APM determines the rate card for different usages. So if you have a big network usage that goes for global use, that sync is very different than a small museum in Podunk, Idaho, who needs music for their exhibit. Or for a nonprofit organization, that's a different rate. So APM, I package the music and make it ready for the search engine, and then APM actually does the licensing.
And you just talked about, the global use in that. Can you also talk a bit about neighboring rights, how they work, what the difference is between countries, and if the composer has to be aware of something there, or if this is all done also through you guys in APM?
Yes. And these policies change every day. It's a mess to try and stay on top of it. I am hopeful that this will change with increasing technology and with cooperative political will. But neighboring rights is the legal right to perform or to broadcast recorded music in public. So that includes streaming platforms, restaurants, TV, radio performances, etc. In the United States, Sound Exchange is the biggest neighboring rights organization. In the UK, it's PPL. In Australia, it's PPCA, and every country has different laws associated with it. And this is why I say a lot of it has to do with political will. Germany is extremely generous with neighboring rights and mechanical rights. UK is pretty good. France is wonderful as well. But then you have the US, and we're pretty terrible at it. We're still in the dark ages. And I know Nathalie has done a great deal of, I think, as a user of, as someone who's actually investigated this for your own pieces. If you'd like to add to that, I'd love to hear.
Well, I mean, it's just that as a composer, sometimes we forget that we perform on our tracks. And actually, even like for me, I play the violin, but even performing your keyboard programming is still a value to neighboring rights. And that's something that when I came from Canada, I was used to having Artisti, which is the neighboring rights organization in Canada, take care of that. And when I got to the US, I was like, wait, you don't know about this? Like most people hadn't even heard about it. And it's been a talks, I think, lately in the recent years. And now people are getting aware of it, but there's many countries that have different rules about it. Some collect only for recordings, like I've played on numerous pop recordings, so I'm getting those, but then on audio visuals, I'm not getting any in most territories. And I think there's a lot of lobbying going on, and I'm one of them trying to push for that. A big issue right now is that a lot of library production music is not considered as commercial music, like a pop album, for example. So some countries, and I've been told even PPL, don't want to recognize these library albums as legit neighboring rights collectibles. So I've even heard that some people actually get a double ISRC code to get a commercial ISRC code for the same album, but just so that it gets those rights in. So that there's some tricks that people have found to go around it, because as I've been, lobbying for, is like, well, if APM puts my album distributed on Spotify, that means it's commercial, right? Because people can actually listen to it because they're subscribed. So if somebody's making money, and there's no reason why me performing there rather than, on this album, Queen of Hearts, there's no reason why all my violin on there shouldn't collect neighboring rights versus another pop album that I've been accompanying somebody else, just because it was another route of commercial, music. So I think it's going to take a lot of goodwill from a lot of people to get this really worked out.
Worked out, yes.
Yeah.
So if members have more questions about neighboring rights or need help, would it be soundexchange.com they should check out, or what organization, who would help there? Who could get our members more information on that?
Actually, I would suggest having a separate speaker for inside sessions, because it is so complex. I am tangentially involved in it, but there's no way I can actually dig into the weeds like someone who actually does this as a full-time job. So I'm happy to speak further and reach out to people who could.
Yeah, no, I think it would be super interesting and next year to have a session. It's such complex. So we're almost at the end. I just want to check. So are you usually looking, Mirette, for composers? Are composers approaching you? Is it a combination of both? If someone wants to break into production music, what would they need to send you? What are you looking at?
What I usually like to do is, if someone I'd like to get a feel for the style of that composer and what that composer really wants to do. So generally, I will spend, I encourage people to reach out to me. I spend a lot of time on Zoom, and I discuss what is it that they would really like to do. And then we sort of go back and forth a little bit. I oftentimes will have them do some homework before submitting anything, or before working on things. And the most important thing when you do reach out to me is, what do you want to be writing, and who do you want to license your music? And so I try to get a really good feel for that. We have a mission and a company policy that for every male composer we bring on board, we have a female. So female composers are often a little bit more shy about reaching out. And I will talk a little bit about gender differences that I've seen. I find that the female composers along gender lines go through our agreement with a fine-tooth comb, and I will sit down with them, which I very much appreciate. Completely along gender lines. We're interested in music that doesn't sound like anything else. So we do not accept cliched music, trying to sound like Hans Zimmer, trying to sound like, whoever. We want to know what your unique voice sounds like. So those are some of the things that we do in the beginning of the curation process. And then, of course, we like to see samples of your work. MP3s are very much appreciated at that stage. And we take it from there. Oops, I think you're on mute.
Nathalie, anything for you to add also? Any tips for anyone that wants to break into production music?
I mean, I would say that I actually recommend, and even though, for me, Mpath is my family, I still recommend having 2 or 3 labels that you feel really, you know, not having a ton of them, but I find that having that, it as an artist, it actually helps expand a little bit on your kind of development as your own artist. For example, the other two that I'm working with have different distributors, which I find important because I don't want to compete with me or the label within like APM, EMI. So the others are with Warner and, you know, Universal. So I feel like as an artist, I'm covering the different publishers, and that way I can actually get discovered by Universal. My name gets tracked, and maybe I'll get a placement on Mpath because they found me on some other distribution. And I find that that's the smart way to kind of do full circle and cover territories without being competing with your own family, basically, you know. And,
no,
and
actually,
you know,
we encourage this. I think it's good for everybody. It is what I call positive competition. And the more experience you can gain with other libraries who have maybe a slightly different business model, where you can be discovered by different pools, it's a way of, I mean, everyone benefits by having your tracks in different music libraries. But we do have the largest catalog of women composers, and so we get picked on a lot. People do come to us and say, we want a woman composer for blah 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 blah. So, well, here's our roster. And we do we actually put your tracks on our website along with a bio and a photo of you, so that people can discover you totally independent of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never really found any label more devoted and passionate about their composers, really.
And if you haven't seen yet, Mirette put her email address in the chat room. Please write that down. If you want to submit, check out Mpath's website. This was super inspiring and interesting. I learned so much. Thank you for spending the hour with us. And I apologize again about being locked out of the account, which was not my doing. I know the password. I want to thank Valerie because she set that all up and she was a driving force there. Thank you so much. Jeff, thank you for putting all the links in the chat room, which I usually do, and I didn't have time. So thank you. This is
I just added my IG up there if anybody wants to connect,
check out Nathalie not only on Instagram, also check out her Spotify page, her artist page, check out her tracks on Mpath. But most of all, Mirette and Nathalie, thank you so much for sharing and giving us so many insights and spending time with us. I think everyone enjoyed that, and I'm very grateful for having you here.